I've always loved the winter. There's something magical about the snow, the way it blankets the world in a hushed stillness, turning the mundane into something extraordinary. As a child, the cold days meant sledding, snowball fights, and coming back inside for hot chocolate by the fireplace. Those memories felt like pure joy, untouched by anything dark or sinister. But there was something else about winter, something I didn't like. It was a feeling I couldn't quite name, an unease that crept in whenever the snowfall grew heavy. As if something was watching me from the shadows. I'd felt it even as a child, but back then, I was too preoccupied to dwell on it. My time was split between sledding with my best friend, Michael, and playing on my Game Boy Color when the cold became too much. Yet now, as an adult, those memories have taken on a different hue. The uneasiness I felt during snowstorms lingers in my mind, sharper and harder to ignore, especially when the snow begins to fall again. It was during one of those snow-filled days that Michael and I decided to go sledding. The first real snowstorm of the season had transformed our neighborhood into a frozen wonderland. The biggest hill in the area, our meeting spot, called to us like it always did. Michael and I had been inseparable since kindergarten, where our friendship was sealed in detention for doodling less than appropriate things on our desks. We spent most winters racing to that hill, the icy slope challenging us to conquer it before we could ride it down. That day, we were the only ones brave, or foolish, enough to face the biting cold. The world seemed deserted, save for the occasional curl of smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. From the top of the hill, we could see it all, the snow-covered rooftops, the quiet woods surrounding the neighborhood, and the faint outlines of our own houses. As usual, Michael and I made a game of racing to the top. The ice fought back, sending us sliding and laughing as we clawed our way up. When we finally reached the peak, Michael beat me by a fraction of a second. "First place, sucker," he yelled, throwing his arms in the air. We stood there, catching our breath and admiring the view. The stillness of the world around us was mesmerizing. No one else was outside, just the two of us, alone in the frozen quiet. Or so we thought. We didn't notice it at first, but something felt off. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore, it was heavy. Watching. Michael began counting down for our first ride down the hill. Ready? 3, 2. But I didn't wait. I leaped onto my sled and rocketed down the slope, laughing as Michael's protests faded behind me. For a moment, the rush of cold air against my face drowned out everything else. Then, I saw it. Something moved at the edge of the woods. Michael's voice echoed behind me as I shot down the hill. "Oh yeah, you cheater. Get back here." I laughed, the rush of cold air and the thrill of the race pushing away any uneasiness. I reached the bottom near the woods just as Michael caught up, his sled slowing to a halt beside me. He gave me a playful shove for taking off early, but I just grinned, brushing it off. For hours, we raced up and down the hill, our laughter the only sound breaking the stillness. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows over the icy slope. Standing at the top one last time, Michael proposed a change. "Let's try the side path," he said, a spark of mischief in his eyes. I hesitated. The side path was steeper, lined with dense trees at the bottom, a maze of trunks you'd have to navigate perfectly to avoid injury. Everyone in the neighborhood remembered what happened to Jay the year before. One bad run down the side path had left him with a broken arm, and none of us had dared try it since. But Michael wasn't about to back down. "Come on," he urged. "Just think how cool this'll be to tell everyone at school." Reluctantly, I followed his lead. We positioned our sleds at the edge of the hill, the steep decline stretching before us like the mouth of a great beast. Michael gave me a knowing look. "Let's do this." With that, he pushed off, his sled racing down the slope and weaving effortlessly between the trees. I watched, frozen at the top, as he disappeared into the shadows of the forest below. Fear gripped me. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't just stand there. Gritting my teeth, I scooted forward, and gravity took over. The sled careened down the icy path, dodging tree after tree. Adrenaline coursed through me until I hit a hidden bump near the edge of the woods. I was airborne. The world spun around me before I crashed into the ground, snow exploding in a frosty plume. The icy chill stung my face as I lay there, disoriented and breathless. Slowly, I pushed myself up, brushing the snow off my coat. My sled wasn't far, a jagged crack along its edge marking the end of its life. I muttered a curse under my breath and turned to find Michael. But he wasn't there. "Michael!" I called, my voice echoing through the forest. Nothing. I spotted his sled about 20 yards away, perfectly intact but eerily abandoned. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. This had to be one of his pranks. "Nice try, Michael," I shouted, stepping further into the woods. "You're not gonna scare me. And you owe me a new sled." The forest swallowed my voice, the stillness closing in like a smothering blanket. I kept moving, the orange glow of the fading sunlight casting the trees in an otherworldly hue. "Michael!" I yelled again, the tension in my voice betraying my growing fear. No response. Michael loved his jokes, but he wasn't one to drag them out like this. The silence was unnatural, unnerving. The deeper I went, the more the shadows seemed to stretch and shift, as if the forest itself was alive, watching. Something was wrong. I called out again, "Michael, let's go. It's getting dark." My voice hung in the frigid air, unanswered. The forest seemed heavier now, pressing in on me, every crunch of snow underfoot loud against the eerie silence. As I turned to head back, something caught my eye, a vague shape in the distance, obscured by the trees. A structure. Curiosity gripped me. Against my better judgment, I moved closer. The outline grew sharper, a snow fort, its shape almost too perfect, too intricate for kids to have built. I quickened my pace, and as I neared, I spotted Michael through one of the small snow-carved windows. Relief washed over me. "Michael!" I shouted, but he didn't react. He just stood there, staring intently at something inside the fort. I approached the entrance, a simple arch carved into the icy wall. On the outside, it looked like a typical snow fort, albeit unusually large. But as I stepped inside, my breath hitched. The interior was impossibly elaborate. Snow walls were carved with intricate patterns, mimicking the appearance of wallpaper. Snow furniture, chairs, a table, even a couch, was arranged with unsettling precision. Paneled windows were etched into the walls, complete with frosty curtains. Each detail suggested care and purpose, but it was wrong, too deliberate for something meant to melt away. Michael stood in what appeared to be a bedroom, gazing at the snowy bed adorned with frozen engravings. I grabbed his shoulder, startling him. He jumped, spinning around with wide eyes. "Geez, man. You scared the crap out of me," he said, clutching his chest. "You scared me first," I shot back. "Why'd you run off? You left your sled behind." "Sorry," he said sheepishly. "At first, I was gonna prank you, hide and jump out or something. But then I found this place. It's insane, right? I mean, who does this? It's just a snow fort, but," he trailed off, motioning to the intricate carvings. My eyes drifted to a wall at the far end of the room, where strange words were etched into the snow. "It comes in the storm." Michael chuckled nervously. "Probably some older kids trying to be edgy. You know, like Frosty the Killer or whatever." "Yeah, probably," I muttered, though my stomach twisted in unease. I glanced out the nearest window and saw the last light of the sun fading. The forest around us grew darker, shadows stretching unnaturally long. "We should go. My mom's gonna freak if I'm late." Michael nodded. "Yeah, same here." As we stepped outside, a bitter chill swept through the trees, raising goosebumps on my skin. I froze for a moment, feeling that strange sensation again, the feeling of being watched. The forest seemed alive, the towering trees shifting in the dim light as if to whisper secrets to the growing darkness. Shaking it off, I followed Michael back through the woods. We parted ways at the edge of the neighborhood, saying quick goodbyes before heading to our homes. Later that evening, I sat at my desk, gazing out the window. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the world in icy silence. The crackle of the fireplace behind me offered comfort, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the fort. How had I forgotten something so strange? I leaned back in my chair, trying to piece together the events of that day. Every detail of the fort, its bizarre intricacy, the cryptic message, played over in my mind. It didn't make sense. The wind howled against the windows, making the room feel colder despite the fire. A shiver ran down my spine as the memory of that day began to resurface in sharper clarity. Something about the fort, about that phrase on the wall, refused to leave me. It comes in the storm. I closed my eyes, letting the flickering light of the fire dance across my lids. The sound of the wind outside grew louder, almost deliberate. The cold morning air burned my lungs as I sprinted toward home, the snow crunching beneath my boots with every frantic step. I didn't dare look back. I could feel it, a presence just behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath escaping in rapid clouds of mist. Each time my foot hit the ground, I expected something to grab me, to pull me back into the woods. But nothing came. By the time I reached my house, I was gasping for air, my legs trembling as I fumbled with the front door. Slamming it shut behind me, I collapsed against it, the warmth of the house enveloping me. "Everything okay?" my mom called from the kitchen. "Yeah," I lied, trying to steady my voice. "Just tired." I dragged myself upstairs, too rattled to say more. The morning replayed in my mind, the figure at Michael's house, the footprints, the unshakable feeling of being followed. It wasn't my imagination. I peered out of my bedroom window, scanning the edge of the woods in the distance. The snow fell steadily, erasing any trace of footprints, leaving the forest a pristine, eerie white. I wanted to believe it was just my overactive imagination, too much late-night gaming combined with leftover fears from our discovery of the fort. But deep down, I knew better. The day passed uneventfully, but unease lingered in the back of my mind. As evening fell, I sat by the living room window, watching the snowstorm intensify. The wind howled outside, rattling the panes. Shadows stretched and danced across the walls, distorted by the flickering light of the fireplace. I couldn't shake the memory of that figure, tall, unmoving, and watching me. That night, I woke to a sound. A faint crunching, like footsteps in the snow. I sat up in bed, straining to hear over the wind outside. There it was again, closer this time. My heart raced as I tiptoed to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The yard was empty, blanketed in white. Then I saw it. Near the edge of the woods, a tall figure stood motionless, its dark outline barely distinguishable against the snowy backdrop. My stomach twisted in fear as I realized it was the same figure I'd seen before. Its head tilted slightly, as if it knew I was watching. I stumbled back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. When I dared to look again, it was gone. The rest of the night passed in a blur of restless paranoia. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind sent shivers down my spine. By morning, I was determined to put an end to this. I called Michael, my voice shaky as I recounted what had happened. "We need to go back to the fort," I said. "What? Are you crazy?" Michael's voice wavered, but I could tell he was as scared as I was. "Why would we go back there?" "Because," I said, forcing conviction into my words, "whatever this is, it started there. We need to figure out what's going on." After a long silence, Michael finally agreed. We met later that day at the edge of the woods, bundled up against the bitter cold. The snowstorm had calmed, leaving the forest eerily quiet. "Are you sure about this?" Michael asked, his breath visible in the frosty air. "No," I admitted, gripping a flashlight tightly in my gloved hand. "But we don't have a choice." With that, we stepped into the trees, the path ahead swallowed by shadows. Christmas came faster than I anticipated, and before I knew it, I was packing up my car for the trip back home. Snow blanketed the roads, and the soft glow of holiday lights made the world seem almost peaceful. But in the back of my mind, that unease lingered. The drive was uneventful, the hum of the engine and the crackling of the radio my only companions. My parents were thrilled to see me when I arrived, their house filled with the familiar smells of pine and cinnamon. Yet, even as I settled into the warmth of home, my thoughts kept drifting back to those woods and that fort. The day after Christmas, I finally worked up the nerve to go back. I told my parents I was going out for a walk to clear my head, bundling up in layers to combat the biting cold. The streets were quiet, the snow muffling every sound as I made my way toward the old neighborhood. The hill was still there, exactly as I remembered it. Time seemed to stand still in this part of town, the same trees standing like silent sentinels at the edge of the woods. My breath hung in the air as I stepped onto the familiar path, the crunch of snow beneath my boots echoing in the eerie silence. It felt like stepping into a memory. The woods seemed darker than they should have been, even in the daylight. Shadows stretched unnaturally between the trees, and the air carried an oppressive stillness. I tightened my grip on the flashlight in my pocket, even though I told myself I wouldn't need it during the day. The deeper I went, the more I felt it, the same presence I'd felt all those years ago. It wasn't just the chill of winter, it was something more, something unseen but undeniably there. Finally, I reached the clearing. And there it was. The snow fort stood just as we'd left it, untouched by time or weather. The walls were still intricately carved, the snow furniture eerily pristine. Even the strange inscription remained on the far wall. "It comes with the storm." My stomach churned. The fort should have melted years ago. This was impossible. I stepped inside, the cold air pressing against me like a weight. Every detail was the same, but the air felt heavier, the silence deafening. My flashlight flickered as I shone it around, the beam illuminating the intricate engravings on the walls. Then I heard it. A low whisper, barely audible, coming from the far corner of the fort. My heart pounded as I turned, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The corner was empty, but the sound grew louder, a chorus of overlapping voices murmuring words I couldn't understand. The air grew colder, my breath freezing in the light of the flashlight. I took a step back, and my foot slipped on the icy floor. As I fell, the beam of the flashlight swept across the wall, illuminating something I hadn't noticed before. Another inscription, hidden beneath a layer of frost. "You were warned." Panic surged through me as the whispering intensified, the voices now a deafening roar. I scrambled to my feet, the fort spinning around me. The walls seemed to close in, the intricate carvings shifting and twisting in the flickering light. I ran. Bursting out of the fort, I didn't stop to look back. The woods were a blur as I sprinted toward the edge of the trees, my lungs burning and my legs screaming for relief. When I finally broke through to the street, I collapsed onto the snow, gasping for air. The world around me was still and silent, the fort hidden once more behind the line of trees. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was in those woods, it hadn't stayed there all these years. It had followed me. The sound of snapping branches and guttural growls tore through the forest, pushing us to run faster. Michael led the way, his footsteps kicking up snow that stung as it struck my face. My lungs burned with every breath, the freezing air slicing through me like shards of glass. Behind us, the creature's pursuit grew louder. Its grotesque, elongated limbs crashed against the trees, shaking the ground with every lurch forward. I didn't dare look back, fearing the sight would freeze me in my tracks. "Keep going!" Michael shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. The blizzard intensified, the wind howling like a banshee, obscuring our path. Shadows danced around us as if the forest itself were alive, trying to close in. My legs screamed in protest, but adrenaline pushed me forward. We burst into the clearing near the hill, the faint lights of the neighborhood just visible through the storm. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. The creature let out an ear-piercing screech, and the ground seemed to quake beneath us. "Don't stop!" Michael yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me forward. The incline of the hill loomed ahead. It wasn't as steep as I remembered, but the snow made every step treacherous. We clawed our way upward, slipping and sliding, as the creature closed the distance. Halfway up, Michael stumbled, his foot caught in a hidden root. He fell hard, rolling onto his back as the thing emerged from the tree line. For the first time, I saw it clearly. Its eyes glowed a malevolent crimson, its twisted form silhouetted against the swirling snow. "Michael!" I screamed, reaching for him. But before I could pull him up, the creature lunged. Its jagged teeth snapped inches from his face as he raised an arm in defense. A flash of light illuminated the scene, and for a split second, the storm paused, as if holding its breath. The light came from behind us, streetlights from the neighborhood. The creature hesitated, its grotesque form recoiling from the glow. "Now!" Michael shouted, scrambling to his feet. We sprinted the final stretch, the lights growing brighter with every step. The creature let out a furious howl, its voice echoing through the forest as it retreated into the shadows. We collapsed onto the snow-covered sidewalk, gasping for air. The storm seemed to fade as quickly as it had come, the neighborhood returning to its quiet, serene state. Michael looked at me, his face pale but determined. "What the hell was that thing?" "I don't know," I panted, my mind racing. "But it's not over." We sat in silence for a moment, the distant woods looming like a dark promise. "What now?" Michael finally asked. I glanced back at the forest, my heart still pounding. "We figure out what it wants, and how to stop it. Because if we don't, it's coming back."